Yeah, so I'll start with an introduction to myself, maybe.
Yeah.
My name is Elias. I am from Syria. I am a Marxist. I am currently living and studying in Germany. Uh, yep, that's
That's about it.
basically a brief introduction. Yeah.
Okay. So if I got like the gist of what you were saying in White Nervosa's chat, um do you mind explaining
Uh-huh.
like a little bit about like your perceptions of anarchy that you were talking about then? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Sure. So let me just start by saying that I am extremely sympathetic to anarchism. Like I follow RedTube pretty adamantly, and
Yeah.
as you know, like many of them are anarchists, and I love their content, and it's all just great. I don't
Yeah.
have a problem with anarchism. My problem is with the discourse within the leftist, mediums about anarchism and statism, like traditional or orthodox Marxism, for example. And what happened in the chat was someone was like being extremely aggressive, and I wasn't there from the beginning of the
Right.
debate, but still, like this leftist on leftist, um, I don't know how you want to call it. It's like what Destiny's chat does to every single
Right.
person who thinks differently, and I don't like to see that within leftist circles because you know they people like Destiny also pick up on these stuff. Like, look at these people; they can't even get their stuff together. How can they make their revolution or whatnot?
Yeah.
That was my main issue, I'm not even that well read on anarchism. I've read about it. I'm happy if you'd like to define it in your own words. I'm open to listening.
Sure. So I'd like to start like in the same way that you did. Like I'm an anarchist, but at the same time, like I have a lot of sympathy for or support even for like more statist Marxist approach. Even like Marxist Leninist states, even when they don't get into like extreme tanky discourse, right?
Yeah.
But like any sort of movement that increases the material condition for the workers and attempts to like dismantle the oppressive class relations is a good one in my eyes. um
Yeah.
and yeah, I guess I don't know how early on in the debate you were there earlier, but like when Eric was talking to White Nervosa, and I have a lot of respect for Eric the Viking, even after that
Yeah.
conversation. But I would say that like when you say that the person in chat was being like very very aggressive, I would agree with you, but I would say that like Eric, perhaps unintentionally, in fact, almost certainly unintentionally, knowing what I know about Eric, was also
Mhm.
like coming off very aggressively as well. And I think what this is, it's a problem with it's a problem with discourse. It's definitely a problem with like I hate to be like the centrist here, but it's definitely a problem with both sides of the left where we need to um we need to be able to support each other and like provide emotion the put in the emotional labor required to like take each other at our best until proven otherwise, rather than like jumping at each other's throats. I would absolutely 100% agree with you there. That being said, I do think that in order to like develop our own ideas as leftists, there does have to at some point be like discourse where like people disagree and they can have like a more calm but like still potentially spirited discussion between each other, where we attempt to like develop our own ideas through like talking with each other and discussing like the differences between what we believe in, and not be committed to solidarity with each other when our goals align, but not necessarily be committed to 100% unity when we have genuine disagreements with each other. If that makes any sense.
Of course,
Yeah,
I don't disagree with you
yeah,
there. And probably, like people say, for example, yeah, we can ally now, especially like I live in a social democratic country right now.
yeah,
It's Germany, so it's a little different in the United States. So
right.
maybe in the United States, you guys say like yeah, we'll ally ourselves with the social democrats up until we get to social democracy, and then they'll get off the bus, and democratic socialists and communists will keep pushing that wagon left, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, so for me, it's not even like that. For me, I'd be happy. In fact, I'm willing to work to uh, establish any viable, uh, for example, anarchist commune.
right.
I'm not against that. I'm not gonna get off that wagon, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
And I would say the same about again, I want to put in like a writer here, the get out of DPRK support free card that says with to certain like limits, I would get upon I would stay on the bus for any sort of like workers socialist state project as well, if it was viable. But yeah,
Yeah, I was mainly like, again, I need
yeah,
to emphasize this. Like, I was mainly, upset with the discourse, and
yeah,
I think many people are. Um, like, I don't have a reach. I'm just a normal person. I'm not a
right,
Twitcher. I'm not a YouTuber. I can't get my thoughts out there. I'm just a big fan of BreadTube, and I just want this platform to reach as many people as possible, because it is like LeftTube, or quote unquote BreadTube, really has some talented people, and they're all working really hard in a well-made, well-put videos, researched videos. It's all amazing, and I don't like to get to a point where um, like the recent thing with the ContraPoints. I don't know if you've heard, uh,
yeah,
like there has been a split there, and all of that has generated, like, yeah, look at these leftists. They're even like going all PC on each other now. And personally, I'm living in a pretty left-leaning city here in Germany. Um, so I've had a few conversations with anarchists here, and
yeah.
as soon as we start discussing a state, I'm just an authoritarian. I mean, coming from Syria, I know what authoritarian means.
Right.
Like. Uh, I mean, in the U.S., the mere pull, like if a police officer pulls someone over, and he has a body cam, and he has many arrangements to at least aesthetically guaranteed citizens' rights, uh, although it doesn't really work that way in reality, but at least aesthetically. In Syria, you don't have that. You have just brute, naked authoritarianism,
Right.
and it is extremely, extremely heavy, extremely brutal, and I hate it. You know, we like there's 6 million people, 6 million Syrians right now are out of Syria because they couldn't reconcile. And trust me, there's many people who still are in Syria. I'm sorry for my English.
Oh,
It's a
it's
little
it's
bit
it's been
rusty.
perfect so far. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I may like miss verb here and there.
Yeah, it's it's it's
It's
been
okay.
it's been fantastic. Seriously, don't worry about it. It's been legitimately really good.
Great. Oh, you have a cat. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a cat person. Yeah. So what I was going with this is, I know authority when I see it, and Syrians experienced one of the most brutal authoritarian regimes in the 21st century. Uh, but that still doesn't make me, automatically go like, yeah, all authority is bad and all, the state is by default bad, especially when you're discussing such things from a certain perspective. If I may elaborate a little bit, for example, in Syria, during the rule of the father, Assad the father, so 1970 until 2000, the public sector, which represents the state, the public sector employed more than 90% of Syrians. It was the biggest sector in the economy. And by the way, the West didn't like that.
Yeah.
It was one of their biggest issues with Assad the father. So Syrians, to them, from their perspective, normal, average, everyday Syrians, not Marxists or something, they see the state as their go-to place to get something done in their lives, and they see no other way. They see no other tangible way for that. So from their perspective, the state isn't that big boogeyman,
Right.
Up until, of course, the repression starts. Now, the son, Assad the son, after the death of his father, made some big neoliberal privatization campaigns to appease certain people inside and outside Syria. So the West also pushed for that, and they were pretty happy up until the eruption of the protests in 2011. So what I'm trying to get at is, for example, from the perspective of Syrians, the state isn't a bad thing. It is a bad thing because it has been set up in a bad way, in a wrong way, according to wrong basis. But they're convinced that they can set it up in a way which is more democratic, more transparent, more accountable, less repressive, and so on and so on, like Slavoj Žižek says.
Yeah.
So so that's just briefly like an idea I'd like to put out there.
Yeah. So I guess there's a lot there. Firstly, I want to bring up and I feel like we're moving beyond like the beginning, which was mostly like talking about the discourse, because I think we're mostly in agreement there. But you brought up that you talk to like a lot of anarchist groups, and that they typically dismiss you as an authoritarian when you
not a lot, just
yeah,
a few.
just some of them, right?
A few anarchists, yeah.
And I would say that there are definitely like everyone on the left. There are definitely anarchists out there that are overly aggressive. There are reasons why they're overly aggressive, but it doesn't excuse the fact that they're like, when people like just shut you down and immediately call you an authoritarian, then like if you're having a conversation with someone and that person says, "Oh, you're an authoritarian," no matter what you actually stand for, that is toxic to like actual discourse, and that's like those people, anyone who's like doing that should probably like examine like why it is they're doing that, and maybe put like a little bit more emotional labor forward in communicating with other people in order to get a better understanding of like where they're coming from, right? So yeah, that's definitely shitty that happened to you. But what I would say is that while you're right that the state, in some ways, the way I see the state, and this is like something that I think we may have in common, because this is like the Marxist perception of the state as well. From what I understand, I'm not super well read on my Marx. Heyo, Limbo 314, thank you for the follow. But from my understanding of like the Marxist definition of the state is that the state is by necessity an instrument of violence from one class to another, right? That's something that I think we can both agree on. Even though the state may provide like assistance to some people and may have like social programs that are benevolent in some way, as an institution, the state is by definition a tool of class warfare. Is that something you'd agree with? Or because I'm pretty sure that's something Marx writes about.
I totally agree with that. Within the confines and frameworks of a global capitalist system.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the only possible definition of a state. This is the only possible, what's the word, manifestation of such a tool to govern society in a certain way. It has to be, because don't forget, it's not just the United States state. So it's not the state of Canada. It's not just the state of the UK. These states are in competition with each other because of the global system, because of the frameworks of that system. So they will act like individuals in a certain way, which is extremely destructive, extremely divisive, and will be exactly what we all protest, will be exactly what we all hate, which is, these neoliberal shills at best, the best versions of states around the world are like, these quasi-free neoliberal states like the United States, for example, or you wouldn't say like the Assad regime is a motto for modern statehood. It's just like minor distinctions that which is the point that me and you started talking about in the chat of White Nervosa, and I was asking about it, and thank you, by the way, because the way you handled my questions was extremely, like, this is how it should be, right? Among leftists, and when leftists are discussing things with their neighbors or friends or family, this should be always, attempted at least to understand the other person. So what I was saying was, these frameworks will produce certain state, a certain form of state. In other frameworks, when you have another global system running the show, I think those frameworks would differ, and the state would be defined in a different way. In my opinion, at least. What do you think of that?
So the way I see it, and this is hold on, sorry. So you're saying that the state, under a different global economic framework, the state can be defined under different terms because it won't be pressured to act in the same way due to like market conditions. Is that correct? Just as a short summary of what you said.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll go with that.
Okay. So I would say that that's true to an extent. The behavior of the state would definitely change, and it is certainly possible to achieve a form of like state organization that is more equitable than what we have today, right? Like I don't know much about Germany because I'm an American, so I only know anything about America. But so
all you Americans are the state. You only care about America.
Exactly. Okay. But and in the US, at least in like US politics, like even within like the framework of like a capitalist system, right? I would say that while our primary form of political energy shouldn't go towards attempting to like reform the capitalist system, it is definitely possible to make the capitalist system more equitable in certain ways. That's why I support like Bernie Sanders, even though he's not like a perfect candidate and he's not going to achieve socialism. It's like an important form of harm reduction to make sure that the damage inflicted by capitalism and the state are minimized to the extent that they can within the current systems, concurrently with like organizing for some form of revolutionary change, right?
Absolutely.
But I guess what I'd get at, and this is the big critique I have, is that any form of state, from an anarchist definition and to a certain extent from the Marxist definition as well, like a state isn't analogous with a government, if that makes sense. Like the state specifically is an institution that has like a monopoly on violence, that like as a certain cast of people who a certain group of people who govern others, and a certain group of people who are governed. From what I've understood of Marxist definitions, and if I'm wrong about this, feel free to correct me. But like even like the idea of the transitionary socialist state, that's a transitionary socialist state before communism is achieved is seen as like the dictatorship of the proletariat, because it still has the same like relationship of class warfare. It's just used by the proletariat to oppress the bourgeoisie instead of the other way around, from my understanding. And I would say that the key understanding that anarchists have is that when you wield the power of the state, when I mentioned this briefly in White Nervosa's chat, by wielding the power of the state and by being someone who uses state institutions, who governs others through the state, no matter how like benevolent your interests are, even if you're attempting to use the state for the enrichment of all, by necessity you have a certain set of interests in continuing the existence of the state in order to use the state in the way that you are to improve people's lives, right? Like if the state is responsible for ensuring people's well-being, well, then by necessity the state has to perpetuate itself, otherwise it's not securing people's well-being. And the perpetuation of the state as an institution.
Yeah, that's what you were telling me in the chat, exactly, which is the self-perpetuation of the state. Which it totally makes sense. And again, please continue.
Okay.
Once you're done with your point, I'll try to respond.
Yeah, I just want to get everything out there for anyone who wasn't there in the earlier conversation. As the state perpetuates itself, right, you may be forced to make certain decisions based off of perpetuating state power, that may go against, like, you have your interests require you to make decisions that will perpetuate state power over decisions that will not perpetuate that power. And that fundamental interest that you have as someone who wields the state as an institution can have like major conflicts with the interests of those who are governed by the state, who don't directly wield that power. And because of this conflict, I would say that even after transitioning another path to a post-capitalist system, at some point there's a distinction of like interest, of class interest, between those who govern the state and those who are governed by the state. That is fundamental to like the whole concept of the state, from my perspective.
Yeah. So, would you like to, for example, have the USSR as an example to discuss this particular point?
Yeah, if you've got like a thing you'd want to bring up with the USSR, that's fine.
Okay, so
although sorry, I just told you to go, but I would say that like the USSR is a little bit different, because this is sort of a conflict. The idea of the USSR, right, is that the USSR didn't achieve communism. It was like a socialist state with the ideal goal of like defending the revolution until communism could be established. If I understand like the Marxist-Leninist theory correctly. Like it was still like at a lower stage of socialism, which when my criticism of the state would extend to like both the lower stages of socialism and the higher stages of socialism, when there's no like the proletariat's class interests have won out in any sort of revolution.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. I have something to say here. Now, I'm not even going to discuss what, like, this is a big conversation now. Is China socialist? Is China not socialist?
Yeah.
Was the USSR socialist? Was it not? So I'm not even going to go into that.
Right. Okay.
I'm not even going to go. Yeah. So I just wanted try to project your point onto a socialist experiment.
Sure.
Like the Soviet Union may have not been a socialist state, according to some, but it has, as an experiment, as like an attempt, it was an attempt towards socialism.
Yeah.
Even if it failed miserably, like that's still a fact.
Oh, absolutely,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. I'm just.
yeah. So for me, this experiment wasn't created in a vacuum, and as far as I know, the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik Revolution, took place in an extremely hostile global environment, and it was invaded immediately after the revolution. They were dealt with a civil war, so they had, even if they had something theoretical in mind to apply, where it is, for example, less brutal, less I don't know, less repressive, whatever it is. You have to take not only the USSR in a vacuum, you have to take the global situation, and you have to know that, okay, if, for example, if they were, like the word you used, benevolent, if they were benevolent, and if, they were, the best of people, and they really tried to establish that commune, and they really tried to, stick with the theory, would they, that's a question that should be asked, would they lose their territory? Would they have been invaded? Would they have been defeated by the Nazis? Would they have been invaded by the West after the war? This is, which gets us to the same result of, its collapse in 1991. So both are the same result with different details. So what I'm trying to say is, you have, for example, I'll also try to, I'm not trying to branch off here, but I'll also add another example, which is my country. So I already told you, right? I already told you that Assad is horrible. He is he should be prosecuted. He's a criminal. His goons are criminals. Syria is one of the hellholes of, this planet. If you're talking about repression, it was actually fine, a little bit fine economically before the war, but as far as repression go, yeah, it's one of the worst places after Saudi Arabia and countries like that. But still, I have to bear in mind, when I'm here in Germany speaking about the situation in my country, I have to see the viable options. My parents are still in Syria. Okay, so I can't just say, yeah, fuck Assad. For example, we live in my parents live in a city where it is, very, where at a certain point in the war, they were actually threatened of, an invasion by al-Nusra Front, which is the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. And we're from a Christian minority in Syria. I mean, personally, I'm an atheist. My whole family are, non-believers, but still, on paper, there's no such thing as no religion in Syria. You have to be either a Christian or a Muslim or whatever. You have to be something.
Right.
So on paper, I'm a Christian. So what they wanted, al-Nusra Front, what they wanted was clear. They wanted to, for example, slaughter the Alawites and the Christians. That was very clear. It wasn't even like implicit. It was very explicit. And we saw those videos, we saw many videos of them literally doing what they said they were going to do with Western backing. So at this point, you have to look at this, pragmatically. I can't go ahead and say, yeah, come, let the U.S., topple Assad. And at the same time, I can't defend Assad. At the same time, I can't go and say, like, yeah, let Assad slaughter his people and nobody intervenes. There's no, I always say this, there's no good answer. But at least let's try to analyze things properly. Syria is not in a vacuum. The Soviet Union was not in a vacuum. All the states that exist within certain frameworks, and they're only going to act, and they're only going to be defined according to those frameworks. Now, that being said, again, I am extremely sympathetic. In fact, my idol, one of my idols, and probably, in my opinion, the most important intellectual alive right now is Noam Chomsky, and he's an anarchist, and you know, I can never disagree with anything that guy says or writes. I can never find myself disagreeing with anything he says. But I still can't say like, yeah, let's say out loud like, yeah, let's first thing abolish the state. You know,
Yeah.
I'm still not at that point, but I'm extremely convinced. You know, if you're speaking rationally with me, of course, it's a very nice idea, and if it is to happen, I'm not going to stand in the way. In fact, I'm going to aid for it to happen. But otherwise, you know, personally, I'm a central planning guy. I study computer engineering, so I have, you know, a little bit of knowledge, more than the average person, of the current technological advances, and I know that we can make an extremely efficient economy globally, with minimal repression, maximizing accountability through technology, through technological means. This will somehow work towards, you know, weakening the positions within that bureaucracy, which is the state, the positions which are, you know, holding power.
Yeah.
Like, if you become a president, you're not you didn't become suddenly like Superman, right? Your position has power. It has, you know, according to a certain law or a constitution, you have power. So when that power is minimized and it is, you know, subject to, for example, accountability using certain technology for, if we organize society maybe in a way where everything, literally everything, every official thing is a public record, and you know, remove the human factor in that, put in the you know, the tech, you know, tools to aid us in that. I think that's doable, and Professor Richard Wolff, you know, talks about that in an amazing way. The Surfs had him on their stream, and that interview was awesome. I strongly recommend it to everybody. Yeah, but again, I can never stand like in front of an anarchist and say, hey, what are you doing? You know?
Yeah.
I totally agree with everything you stand for. It's just another form, like us leftists, like we want to abolish this horrible, immoral, brutal system, right?
Sure.
Which is capitalism. And that is, for me, that is a priority. I actually feel, I may be naive for thinking that, but I actually feel like once the system is gone, we're not going to have a problem organizing, because, you know, we live within the frameworks of the system.
Yeah.
Like you can create you rarely can create your own frameworks unless you have a lot of money or power. But otherwise, you have to live within these frameworks, and these frameworks, you know, demand certain behavior and certain attributes for each person and for each entity in the system, including the state.
Yeah.
So,
so there's a lot that was brought up there. That hold on, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's all good stuff. So I guess what I'd want to talk about first is just the first thing you brought up there, which is that socialist states do not exist in a vacuum, and that like in many ways their repressive behaviors are forced by like the framework they participate in with other pressure from other nations. Is that like a good like summary of what you said, or am I missing something like really important to that?
I'm not even saying that as a fact. I'm just saying that that is a big factor, and we need to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess the criticism that I started up with, the reason I brought up earlier, the difference between like what I would see and what I think many Marxists would see, unless I'm not a Marxist, so if I'm getting any like Marxist theory wrong, feel free to correct me. But so like when we talk about like the Soviet Union or things like that, like it's like I don't mean to say that these things are not socialist, but like under a Marxist framework, they are not yet communist, right? They exist. They haven't made the fully transition to that. But they were absolutely, as you said, socialist experiments that failed for various reasons, depending on where you look at. And yeah, I would say that is an important factor to realize that the systems that these things are working within. However, I think my criticism of them, of states as institutions, has to do with more of like the inherent nature of the state than how the state is pressured to act from other states in our current capitalist framework. So like I said, like I this in the same way that like you like have solidarity with anarchists, I try to like have the same amount of solidarity with like more state centered socialists. And if there's like a state socialist project that's going on that seems like it actually like is viable and is not like is going to like actually like liberate people, then yeah, I'm going to be in favor of it. Especially like if you look at Cuba is the example I'm most in favor of, and Cuba isn't perfect. There's a lot of problems there, but when you compare it to countries that had similar when you compare it to countries that had similar material conditions around the time of the Cuban Revolution, and you track their development to today, you can see Cuba's done way better than other like Caribbean and Latin American nations that have gone through the same and even like Puerto Rico to an extent, which is part of the United States. Cuba's a better place to be than in some there in some aspects. I'm sorry,
I couldn't help but remembering Trump when you said Puerto Rico, but okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but so I would say that like yeah, we should take that into consideration. However, I feel that like even with like communism fully achieved and even with capitalism abolished, there are a few issues inherent to like a state organization that I think are impossible to like. A state by definition has like these certain inherent conflicts within it that will lead to at some point inevitably some sort of post-state system, no matter how we get there. When you briefly mentioned the idea that you can't get on board with like just abolishing the state first and seeing what happened, like putting our primary force into abolishing the state. I would say that I actually also agree with you that our primary efforts at this point can't be abolishing the state. I don't think if you overthrew the United States government today, you wouldn't have anarchy in the United States. You'd have a series of smaller ethno-states fighting each other and enacting genocide. And
exactly. I just want to note just one little something. I haven't read nearly enough. Like I'm absolutely not well read on anarchism. I just read about it and saw people, talking about it, saw videos, whatnot. But I'm not like I haven't read like Bakunin or Kropotkin or I haven't read any of the literature.
So I would say that and I guess you brought this up as well with like your critique of Assad. Like Assad is bad, but like US interventionism would be worse, and there's like all sorts of bad stuff happening in Syria that we like there's no good option, as you put it. And there's that's like really that's what I see as like a really valid perspective for analyzing like what I see as oppressive state behavior today. Like, well, it's oppressive in some extent, but it exists as like a socially necessary tool because we don't yet have the organizations in place that would supplant the state when in any sort of like ideal anarchist revolution that we can organize. A lot of like the tactics that I support, like as an anarchist, involve operating separately but within the state, in order to organize along anarchist principle. This is like a big thing for all anarchist practices, is to organize within the current within but separate from the current framework, in order to promote anarchist social relations between revolutionaries, and as we can expand these social institutions like unions, like neighborhood defense groups, like mutual aid foundations for physical and emotional labor, like food banks, things like that. These sorts of anarchist organizations not only fulfill the social necessities that each person requires to, like, the material needs people have to exist outside of a state system or without our current state system. They also socialize people into behaving in ways that allows them to organize without a state, right? So, like, if you are an active participant in self-governance, then you yourself learn the various skills that you need in order to govern yourself. You learn how to participate in meetings. You learn how to track who's speaking and speak up for those who maybe aren't speaking as much. You learn how to engage in, like, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-LGBT phobic action to support other comrades who are oppressed in ways other than economic oppression. This sort of direct participation, I feel, leads to it's much slower, and it is in some ways more vulnerable in the short term to capitalist intervention than a state socialist method of organization. But from what I've seen so far, there does not seem to be a substitute long term to people self-governing when it comes to avoiding corruption, when it comes to avoiding people in positions of power abusing their authority in some ways. Like you mentioned, and you mentioned you had your degree in computer engineering, and I'm in sort of like I have like 3/4 of a degree in like cybersecurity, so I'm not like cybersecurity and database work, so I'm sort of like in the same boat. Yeah. Yeah, I dropped out a while ago because of like a mental health crisis, and I don't think I'm going to finish it. I think I'm going to go and study philosophy instead because I've given up on having employable skills.
This is really interesting to me. I mean, you dropped out because of mental health, because of the university, or just the other thing, like some other thing.
I'm bipolar, and I had like a really bad depressive episode, and because it may have been partially because of school, it may have been partially just being bipolar, but I was hospitalized for about a week, and I spent like about 2 months before that just not going to class and doing anything, and I couldn't recover my grades. Yeah, so I dropped out with the intent to reapply, but then I wasn't able to get the scholarships that I had beforehand, and I wasn't able to afford to go back to that school, so I've been in limbo ever since.
But that's unfortunate.
Yeah,
I mean, I share the depression from this whole educational system, which is pretty much works like the market. It is a market.
Yeah,
it's horrible.
Absolutely.
Anyway, continue.
And I would like to mention, before I get back onto my main point, I would like to mention that after dropping out, I did like participate in like the workforce for a few years, like doing various IT jobs, and like even though I'm not nearly making enough money to be comfortable like doing Twitch stuff primarily and like trying to grow like online content creation as my career at this point, I'm no longer working in the workforce because I a lot of reasons that it would take a long time to explain, but I would say that the biggest advantage, even though like participating in like the labor market from my perspective was just completely unbearable. Like I would have enough money to like meet my basic needs, but I would wake up every single day, and the only thing I could think about was I have to go back to work, and like think about like have like an existential crisis like 24/7 because of that.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I can totally relate. I mean,
Yeah.
I always discuss that with my girlfriend. Like, I don't wanna fucking graduate. What am I gonna work for? A stupid like app company doing some bullshit app
Yeah.
for the rest of my life, making
Uh,
money for someone that I'll never meet. Like, it's just
yeah.
bullshit. And especially in our domain, like, it's mostly private sector, and it's mostly just bullshit
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah.
But as you were saying, I also like have like a really strong belief in our ability to have like technology and like information technology and to help dramatically increase the efficiency of our production, right? Under a capitalist framework, people talk a lot about like efficiency under capitalism. If we were able to organize a system that doesn't have unnecessary competition and duplication of labor under competition, and does not participate in excess waste due to overconsumption, due to like artificial demand induced by advertising, efficiency would go like through the roof. Like there's
Exactly.
this is not this is not like an efficient system where you have 10 different companies making the same shitty product that's intentionally breaks every 2 years. But
Exactly.
just as a state, I would say doesn't exist in a vacuum. These sorts of technological systems that can help centralize our economy and take power away from the bureaucrats also wouldn't exist in the vacuum. Like these are valuable tools, but the determination of who wields these tools and what structure these tools exist within still has a very dramatic effect on what the results of these things are going to be.
Absolutely.
And I think that while like using technology to help plan our economy is like a very important step in our economic development, and I would like to see us move on from market forces in the future. The framework that we use these tools within is going to have a huge impact on what the results of using these tools are going to be. And I would say that it does not by default take power away from the state bureaucrats. If the state bureaucrats are the ones administering the computer systems that centralize economic planning, it has just as much of a possibility of reinforcing their power, as they are the ones who are the arbiters of what is and is not important data, and how to interpret the data that we gather using these systems. Sorry.
So I have just a brief point here. I mean, unfortunately, I don't have enough time today for us, to maybe start brainstorming, me and you, about how would you solve this? Because I'm gonna do what I was gonna do next is ask you, like, okay, you study cybersecurity, so maybe, for example, one of the problems when you automate an economy and base planning upon the technology, you're gonna have, for example, a new quote unquote, a new crime to be committed, which is, for example, that cyber hacking this planned economy, and maybe someone stealing some resources and relocating them from for someplace to another. But then I would move on. I wouldn't agree with you. Those are absolutely things that we need to deal with if we are to implement such technology. But what I would ask you is that is in itself a new need that we've created, and we have to work towards towards fulfilling that need, which is the need, for example, for an absolutely secure network of of computers around the world, where the human interaction is minimized. It is just, you plug in numbers and data, and it's all being calculated in a certain way, and these resources go there, stuff like that. But this would be an extremely lengthy conversation, which I'm glad to have at any time. But, what interests me more is that I'm not like when you say I'm an anarchist, I'm not, that the typical reaction would be, oh, you don't want a state, okay,
right,
you're crazy, like, people wouldn't comprehend that concept, right? And I think as an anarchist yourself, you've got to be like, you've experienced that probably in many times, like people, oh, no state, like that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not that guy. I'm absolutely, grasping the concept, and when you start imagining how society would look like, I can totally get that picture. Unlike Destiny, by the way. But the thing is, it's like what you said yourself. If right now you abolish the state in the United States, it'd turn to many ethno-states.
Yeah.
Right. So, and what the solution you proposed was, we work throughout time to. Correct me if I'm saying anything wrong. This is what I understood from what you said. So you want people to organize, starting with anarchists, start organizing society in a certain way, make more unions, make more people join those unions. And after a certain time, enough people would be adapted to that, style of life and to the frameworks of those organizations to a point that you can actually, at this point, you can abolish the state. Is that close to what you said, or? Yeah,
that's more or less like the idea is that we organize within the state and gradually supplant the roles of the state one by one with more community driven roles, while inevitably engaging in I am pretty much as non-violent as is humanly possible. However, historically, when any sort of socialist organization has been attempted, there's been a reaction from the capitalists that has involved like direct violent attacks, and the systemic violence of the current system justifies self-defense against acute acts of violence against anarchist and communist projects. But yeah, that's more or less what I meant.
Yeah. So what I was getting at is, we've just discussed the university, and I don't know. I'll just say what it is to me. People, all my classmates, it's a mess. The way they inject and they engrave the system within your brain and the frameworks of the system and what you should do and who you should idolize and what you should believe. These are extremely powerful institutions, and they are in the hands of the state, of the capitalist states, one way or another, or the capitalists if it is a private university. These institutions, in my opinion, or in my experience, they have the biggest influence with regards to sculpting society in a certain way. So you can try to organize, you can try to unionize, you can try to do many things, but you have to capture, or at least stop, some tools that the state is using, that the capitalist state or the capitalist class are using to fight you. You can't just, allow them to carry on, quote unquote, educating generations in a certain way and indoctrinating them in a certain way. And then you're gonna have to deal with the mess after people have reached adulthood and, their minds are mostly pre-made in a certain way. You're gonna, start telling them. Lots of people, even. I know I've mentioned Destiny a lot in this thing, but Yeah, I had my fair share of anger and frustration about how, how smug he is. It takes a big ego and a big narcissism to just, say like what you're saying can be applied even though I haven't read anything about it.
Right.
And, there's nothing called perspective. There's nothing called, the comprehension of a concept. I mean, even in the debates that he've had with anarchists I don't know if are you familiar, or am I speaking something like nobody knows about, Destiny?
Oh yeah, no, I'm actually the producer and co-host for Non-Compete's Twitch show, so I'm very familiar with Destiny. Personally.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, actually, the best thing I got out of Non-Compete's debate, with Destiny was, I mean, this is what Destiny truly is. I mean, I'm not making a value judgment. He's not good. He's not bad. He's just smug. He's just a narcissist, and that's because of a certain framework. He's literally within a framework. He's like a copy, like an NPC of a certain framework, an end result, so to speak. And this I mean, his behavior with Luna was, totally expected. I mean, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, Destiny clearly hides a lot of this stuff, tries his best at least during other debates. But I have to say that some of the questions Destiny asks anarchists, for example, especially those who came on, I mean, these are legitimate questions, but at the same time, he doesn't have the capacity to understand the response. You know? And Destiny is not a stupid guy. I mean, if you think he's stupid, I mean, this is delusional. I mean, he's not a stupid guy.
Right.
He's a normal person. He thinks he's on the correct side of things, And this is what you're dealing with. This is, in fact, the average person is way worse than Destiny. And that won't change if the average person only got into a trade union. You have to capture the power of the state, in my opinion. Capture the tools of the state and start, putting your own frameworks only on through education, to make new generations which are capable of actually making a revolution in this regard. Otherwise, I don't see it as impossible. I just see it as a waste of energy and time and resources. I'm not saying it's gonna fail if we went your way, for example. I'm saying it's gonna be, we're gonna have a lot of problems,
right? So I would say that no, that's like and again, like the probably the most valid critique of anarchist systems that I think you can give is it's by the time we can enact any sort of like anarchist revolution, the planet will be destroyed by climate change. Like Malatesta, one of his more well-known quotes is, "We must walk towards anarchy," because it is a very long process to build like these sorts of institutions that I'm talking about. However, I would say that when you say people are educated under a capitalist system and it's used as a weapon against leftists of all creeds, that's 100% correct. The like state-controlled, the current like liberal democratically controlled state will has like a vested interest in perpetuating itself, and it will use the education system, it will use the media, it will use every tool at its disposal to perpetuate itself to the extent that it is able to. However, I don't think that capturing the tools of the state is the next solution from there. I feel that what we need to do in order to ensure that people are treated equitably is we need to build our own set of tools, right? Because when we capture the tools of the state, we are implicitly giving up control to those who are to those who wield the tools of the state to govern those who do not wield those tools in a way that is just. And
could you repeat that? Could you repeat that maybe?
Yeah. So when we have a certain when we seize control of the state, we have a certain group of people who are the ones who are controlling the state, and we have another group of people who are governed by the state in some way. And by adopting this framework, we have to give our trust to the people who are governing the state to act in the best interests of all people. However, even when even if these people are 100% benevolent and acting in the best way to do it, and they don't have any, we have a worldwide revolution, right? We have either one giant socialist state, or we have many socialist states, or working in cooperation, whatever. If we still have the state framework at that point, those who are we have not socialized people in the way that is required for them to govern themselves. They are still being governed by another entity, and in order for them to govern themselves, they are still going to have to educate themselves along the same sort of lines that I was talking about, where within the current system, you organize outside of the state in order to educate yourself on like the social or the methods of social organization that are necessary to move beyond the state, right? In order to make things truly egalitarian, where there is not one group governing another, but everyone is engaged in self-governance. However, those who are providing for everyone's needs using the state as an institution have a vested interest, even if it's out of complete benevolence. They have a vested interest in continuing the existence of the state, and organizing along non-state lines can be seen as a direct threat to the state's existence. They are obligated, in order to continue to exist, to prevent these movements from taking place. And there's an inherent class conflict here between those who govern and those who seek to govern themselves, where one group cannot abide the other. And I see this as like a conflict that will, at one point, whether it's before or after any sort of whether it's during or after capitalism, this is a conflict that is going to play out at some point. I would say...
Can I say something real quick about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but I just have this point that I think I tried to make, but it didn't, I didn't make it properly.
Sure.
So if you want like this, the concept of the self-perpetuating state, and you talk about, even if it's if those bureaucrats, for example, were absolutely benevolent. I didn't mean that in my for example image, in my image of the society that I'd like to live in, which is the socialist, the communist society that I'd like to live in. I'm not basing my image upon the benevolence of certain people or certain bureaucrats.
Right.
I'm speaking. What I'm saying is, remove frameworks that incentivizes certain behavior, and put frameworks in place that eases other kinds of behavior, which protects the public and the people from any maliciousness that may or may not come up. Or probably, I'd say it's gonna come up sooner or later from the state.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, not like, dude, if like everyone appointed in that state was totally good, if they were all like the sons of Jesus or something, like it's all going to be okay. That's not what I'm saying. It's what I'm saying is, you try to strip, that's my first step. You try to strip capitalism from its main tools that it uses to sculpt generations, to sculpt society in a certain way. This is the most important thing, in my opinion, which is mainly two things: the media and the educational system.
Yeah.
These are the two main, tools that now they're in the hands of capitalists. I can say something about education, for example, like one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the big mistakes that the Soviet Union made, for example, is that they went with the traditional educational system. They went with the traditional Western style, education, and it is capitalist. It is a market.
Yeah.
The frameworks within it is a market. I saw an interview for Professor Richard Wolff on Fox News like a few weeks ago. He was talking about, abolishing grading and stuff like that. It's very interesting. I also highly recommend that. The Fox host asked him, like, the Soviet Union had a strict grading system and it was more rigid than ours, and they had, sometimes in certain areas they had better results. So what the response from Richard Wolff was awesome, which was I know the Soviet Union did this. That's why I'm against it.
Right.
Because it is authoritarian, it is capitalistic, it is, in a certain way, has frameworks that won't produce that generation, that next generation who's going to, literally carry on the revolution and make the Soviet Union a better place, and actively fight against the bureaucracy, actively fight against the people who are trying to take that country, for example, in the wrong direction. If anything, that is the first step, in my opinion, which is
Yeah.
At least, if not capturing, at least neutralizing these tools and getting them out of the market framework.
Yeah,
this is extremely important for me.
That's actually what I would say is the first step under an anarchist framework as well, is to what the difference is in like how we do that, right? Like you're completely right with everything you just said about how capitalists use these tools to preserve capitalism. What I would say is that like the anarchist solution to that would be, like you mentioned, like people joining labor unions is not going to solve the issue of people in the media and university being programmed in some ways to think in certain ways. And I agree. That's why labor unions in themselves, I don't believe, are sufficient to like any anarchist movement. I think that we need anarchist institutions that people like participatory, self-governing anarchist institutions that are prepared to supplant the role of each state institution that we establish. Again, I've said this a few times, but we established these within yet separate from current state institutions. So we have like we have like our anarchist teaching network, and we operate within the state, but we're not affiliated with the state in any way. Prior to attempting to overthrow the state, we take the same steps of trying to take the tools away from the capitalists. It's just, instead of seizing the tools that the capitalists have already built and remaking them, we attempt to design from the ground up our own tools that are as egalitarian as possible, and then after those tools are ready, we use them to supplant the existing state institutions. I would say that any competent anarchist organization has to have the ability to supplant the state on all levels, not just along labor organization, but along social organization, along education and media, along essentially anything that the state provides and that the markets provide already. We have to have an answer for. And I would say that my criticism of the state isn't necessarily that it would only when I say if everyone is benevolent, I don't mean to say that I did not mean to say by that I didn't mean to imply that your ideal of the state is a state that is ruled by benevolent people, right? Like, it does make a lot of sense to, okay, we're going to take the state, but we're going to reform it or reshape it into a structure that incentivizes people to act in certain ways that bring socialist ideas to the forefront. And that's definitely like the way that the mode of analysis that I would say makes more sense is let's all of these policies and these actions and these individuals' decisions that we all make exist within a framework that determines the costs and benefits of making any given decision. And if we increase the costs of acting, and if we increase the social and costs of acting in ways that harm other humans, and increase the rewards from acting in solidarity with other humans, then we can shape people's behavior through that way. The issue I would see is that a state institution, by definition, by definition. So let's extend that benevolence to the state system, right? This is a state system that takes every possible reform and restructuring in order to ensure that people are treated as equally as possible within the state, right? This conflict still exists, however, because you have essentially created through the state two social classes, one who with competing interests, those who govern and those who are governed. This is like and no matter how benevolent that state system is, and no matter how benevolent the individuals acting within the system are, this is a class conflict that I feel is inherent to any state-based system, because there are competing like material interests between these two groups of people that cannot be reconciled with each other. And while it's certainly possible and absolutely something I'm in favor of to reform and reshape the state in ways that are more equitable and improve the material conditions of people living under the state, I believe that at some point, again, I believe it can happen. I believe we can organize within capitalism to supplant the state, but even if we still have a state after moving beyond capitalism, I believe it is inevitable that this conflict comes to some resolution.
Yeah. So I'm not sold on the idea that of this inherent, class conflict between the governed and those who govern, for a reason. Because, for example, I didn't give you any specifics about the power structure of that state.
Yep.
Right? I did not specify any position for holding more power than another position or whatnot, right? All I'm trying to say is you can call it whatever you want. You can call it a state, a union, a party, anything. The thing I want from this entity is to be the connection between the global communes around the world. Okay, that connection would organize life on this planet, because we are restricted, if not by us, if we're not restricted by things we do or we think, we're restricted by the planet, by nature, by the environment. So this connection, call it whatever you want. I'm still calling it the state because that's my concept. It may be wrong. We're maybe
Well, sorry. I don't want to interrupt you, because it does sound like it's a definitional difference, right? Because under the anarchist definition of the state, a state is like necessitates there being like one group with a monopoly on violence that uses that monopoly on violence to enact certain certain rules and enforce those rules, right? Like a state institution, I believe, is qualitatively different than just a union of independent communes that operate through direct democracy, right? We can absolutely have like organization between communes that are organized through self-governance rather than through the governance of a state. That may be like the definitional issue that we're getting caught up on.
Yeah, I think also another key difference between what we're saying is you're prioritizing the autonomy of the communes. I'm prioritizing the central aspect of it. So
Yeah.
I'm saying that there should be more. There should be more. An individual commune is also an entity in the system. Let's say there's a global anarchy, okay? Global anarcho-communist system. Well, not communist. When we reach communism, it's gonna be fairy tale land at some point. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, almost right. This is the idea. The communist state of society is that end game, right? So let's say we have one version or another of federal communes, federation of communes, working together according to anarchist principles, right?
Yeah.
So I think the difference between me and you is that you'd like to give more and more autonomy and self-determination to the individual communes, while I, on the other hand, would like for the connection, if it's a concept, like if it's a semantic problem, I'm going to call it the state. I'm not sure if that's 100% applicable, but
Yeah.
I want something central, the connection, the apparatus of all these communes to have at least in certain areas and in certain domains to override an individual commune, right?
Yeah. So I would
Does
say
that make sense?
it makes sense. I would say that I don't necessarily place the value of. I would go even further than what you said, where I would value the self-determination of individual communes. I would value the self-determination of individuals beyond most other things. I would say that the commune is the expression of the collective wills of the individuals through self-governance, and then any union between communes is by extension from that, since the commune is still the will of each individual. A union of communes would by necessity be the will of the communes, which would also be the will of the individual under the system. Like the idea is to have everyone directly engage in self-governance. That being said, I do believe that it's going to be it's a practical reality that people will there has to be some level of intervention required among different individuals and different communes in order to prevent either counter-revolutionary forces or the emergence of fascism or any sort of toxic form of social organization from spreading. But I believe that can be done in an anarchist framework without the necessity of there being, because the inherent problem I see with central organization is that the decisions of the central body aren't necessarily guaranteed to be any more morally just than the decisions of this decentralized body. So while it may be slightly more efficient to have things centralized in terms of the speed of making decisions, I would say that the only way to ensure that everyone's moral rights are respected is to leave as much as humanly possible to the individual to decide, and then use anarchy instead of a prescriptive framework of how society ought to be laid out. Use anarchy as a philosophical lens to examine how our society currently operates and to determine what hierarchies are necessary and what hierarchies are unnecessary, and how unnecessary hierarchies affect our daily lives in negative ways. So
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the anarchist form of interventionism would be like if we see one commune acting in a way that's establishing some hierarchy, whether that's like a market-based hierarchy where it's attempting to establish some sort of capitalist system, it's attempting to boost itself up by depriving others, it's enacting like some sort of like toxic or bad faith decision making in an attempt to establish itself as hierarchically above another commune, or an individual is attempting to establish themselves hierarchically above other individuals. We would see that, and we would use the same tactics used prior to the revolution to when we dismantled the existing hierarchy under capitalism. We would apply those tactics and modify them as needed to prevent new hierarchies from occurring through potentially interventionist methods.
Yeah. So just real quick, what do you think of the idea of, for example, an anarchist global federation?
Yeah, I think a global federation is something that would be necessary. However, I believe that like a global federation should only decide matters that are truly global, right? I believe that there are like when we're talking about like global telecommunications networks, things of that nature that exist on a global scale, that is when it's necessary for like the global commune to convene. But practically speaking, most issues aren't something that needs to be decided at a global level. They're things that need to be decided at like the regional level or the local level, more so than
exactly.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that point, and I've said it. Like I said to you that that central thing would be, we will decide. Everybody will decide. What things that what domains that this central body should intervene in, and what things it shouldn't. I'm gonna try. I mean, I don't know. I'd love to continue this conversation.
Oh, if you've got to go to bed, don't worry about it. Yeah, I would love to have this conversation again too. But if you need to go to bed, feel free to like close things out.
Yeah, of course. I still have a few minutes. I just thought, like, if you'd have me on again, maybe next weekend, I'll definitely because I'm now more interested in this conversation than before. I think we need to discuss the philosophical roots of our ideologies to reach a point where we're actually, speaking to each other from a clear and preset point. For example, what do you think of collectivism? What do you think of individualism? What do you think of, for example, the idea of individual nihilism, for example, when people are nihilists and they don't really care about anything. These philosophical, let's say, domains really they're really important, in my opinion, to the way we should look at society. And you're gonna have, it's not an either or, right? It's not like either collectivism or individualism. It's like either existentialism or nihilism. There is a healthy, optimal point in between, right? And we have to discuss that, and we have to be honest, to have an honest and courageous conversation, because the thing is, for example, Destiny asked many of the anarchists that came on his Twitch stream, he asked them totally, some of the questions were totally legitimate, right? So, for example, like if you have, for example, you have Muslims in the Middle East, for example, who really hate Israel. They really do. They do hate Israel religiously because of religious reasons and historical reasons.
Right.
So, and Israel is the same. I mean, there's a reason why Netanyahu fascist bastard is still, in charge, because most of Israelis are voting these people in, and many Israelis, they really hate Arabs. It's very simple. And I realize that, like we discussed, the frameworks of capitalism and the historical context, that this capitalist system, not today, many decades ago, it created conflict along the way, and that conflict is still rooted here in reality right now. But we have to be brave about this. So, for example, of course, you also know, like, the Middle East is an extremely hostile environment for homosexuals, for example, or trans people. It is extremely hostile. Like, I mean, in Syria, you can barely, I mean, even if you're heterosexual, if you're holding your girlfriend's hand in certain areas, you're gonna have a bad time, Not by the state, by the social authority of society. Because it is a religious society. And as leftists, it is important to me to discuss these things honestly and not run away from them when a centrist asks us, a little bit of an edgy question. We should be honest about this and be clear about what tools we have to prevent this, what tools we have to prevent, like, this from even going further, what tools we have to combat this and make it go away, right throughout future generations. And in my opinion, that's extremely important.
I would completely agree that I would even maybe, like you mentioned, like the social institutions of a lot of Middle Eastern countries, even beyond the state, end up enforcing certain cultural norms. And I would say that maybe this is too big of a subject to bring up right before you leave. But
this is why I told you. But if you'd have me again, I'd be glad to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I stream every Saturday. Well, every Saturday that I'm not having a panic attack, I stream at noon Central U.S. time, which I think is.
If you happen to have a panic attack, just call me, man. We can, like, smoke weed together or something.
I wish. But
it's not legal where you're saying.
It's not legal, and also I'm not cool enough to have a hookup. So.
Damn it.
But
okay.
So I guess. Without the expectation of like a long response or like anything, I guess I'd say that those sorts of like social relations you mentioned, where people can enforce certain behavioral standards socially rather than through the state, I'd say that beyond state power, that is the most durable form of enforcing rules. Like our social and cultural relations are a much more durable way of enforcing rules in our society than any state institution could even hope to be. In many instances, like repression of certain races, certain religions, certain sexualities, these exist through the state, but they are primarily an extension of social stigmas that in turn have been those social stigmas were in some way influenced by the in some cases they were actively, like, the fires were stoked by capitalists trying to divide people. But these things they all interplay in each other, and I would say that a lot of anarchists would believe in, rather than seizing state power, we attempt to organize ourselves socially so we can seize social power to socialize people into acting into self-governance and acting without hierarchies, to form a more durable method of implementing socialism and communism than any state could even hope to be. But that's like a big topic, and I have more to say on it, but I don't want to say too much right before you leave. So I guess we'll just leave that to chew on for a little bit.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah. So in previous years, last 8-9 years of my life, basically since the war started in my country, I've been through many phases. Okay, I wasn't always a communist.
Yeah.
I wasn't a capitalist. I hated capitalism, but I was living in Syria. I'm not experiencing capitalism as nakedly as I'm experiencing it, here in a country like Germany, which is a social democracy, but still. So. Uh, I like a few years ago, I went through an orthodox Marxist Leninist phase. The dictatorship of the proletariat. Like, yeah, here's
Yeah.
authority, shove it down your throat and keep quiet. This is the optimum way that society should function. And if you have regressive thoughts like you're homophobic or you're anti-trans rights or you're racist or something, you're going to be punished with the full iron grip of the state.
Yeah.
I was that guy. But once I started, I started getting in contact with the anarchist sphere. I didn't see anything that is irrational, And once I see something that is rational, I'm generally swayed by it. So right now, I extremely calculate the points where I invoke that. Yeah, this here at this point, for example, there needs to be an authority.
Right.
I try to regulate that more, and it's all because of a healthy way of discussing things by these amazing YouTubers, Peter Coffin, Thought Slime, Non-Compete, American Johnson, who else? Damn, I'm forgetting some of them. Lance from the Surfs,
Yeah.
and many awesome YouTube videos. Which really made me get to know, what anarchism, in a very shallow way is, because I haven't read any of the literature. And as a guy from the Middle East, by the way, I just have to say this: in the Middle East, you never hear about anarchists. There's only traditional, Orthodox Marxist-Leninists. This is only in the West. So I didn't even know that there is this ideology that is extremely adjacent to mine, except it's it has a big problem with any form of unjustified authority, rightly so, by the way. Yeah, it's just, we started this conversation by expressing our frustration with the discourse. I'm gonna end it with the same thing.
Yeah.
What got me to be active more and become more lenient, and to change a few of my views was an extremely rational and well thought out way, and through healthy discussions, through a healthy way of putting information together and presenting them. This is extremely important. That's all I'm going to say. And I hate to see this, leftist anarchists versus Marxist-Leninists all the time online. It's just frustrating.
It is really frustrating. But I at the same time, I think like you said, a conversation between two people with different ideas, even if neither person changes their minds, it can lead to an greater understanding and evolution of how each person views the world from their own perspective, which is incredibly valuable, and people should absolutely be having conversations in good faith with each other as leftists, and not be trying to look for opportunities to snipe at each other.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
But I guess I don't want to keep you up too much later if you're if you're going to bed. But it was really nice having you on. And if you ever want to come back on, I'm totally welcome for that. Yeah, just let me know.
I have you on Discord. I'll give you a message maybe next week, and we'll see if we can set this up again and talk about some broader things.
Yeah, sure.
With a little bit more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you very much for this opportunity. You have a very nice personality and very pleasant. And yeah, we're definitely going to do this again.
All right. Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Alrighty. How was that? How do people think about that? I enjoyed that conversation.